G'day and welcome to another episode of Spectrum Uncensored. Today I have with me Mel K from Brisbane. Thank you so much for popping in and saying hello.
Oh, thanks, Jamie Lee. Thanks for having me.
Could you tell me a little bit about what your profession is and your business name, where you're located, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an occupational therapist. I've been an occupational therapist for about 13, 14 years. I've pretty much always worked with children with a lot of focus on children who are neurodivergent. I currently am working at Inside Out Therapy. I am both a clinician or a therapist there, and I'm also the director and owner and founder of the clinic, and we're located across two sites, one in Kallangur and Burpengary on the north side of Brisbane.
So you're saying you've been doing that for like 14 years. That's a long time.
It is, yeah.
What got you into that profession?
Yeah, so
Because you're very, yeah.
I've been doing it a little while, and to be honest, I find kind of every year that I work, I find sort of new like richness and diversity and like layers to the work, which I think if you can find a profession that continuously excites you and also challenges you, I think you're pretty lucky. And I think being able to work with people for me means that there's no 2 days that are ever the same. And now I've actually forgotten your question.
It was just why you chose.
So I guess that's why I continue to choose it every day. The reason that I chose it in the first place was to do with a personal experience around my little sister who had some developmental challenges when she was little, and she went to both speech therapy and occupational therapy for quite a number of years. And some of the time it would be obviously during school hours, and mum would make it back to say pick me up from school, so I'd kind of tag along and sort of observe, or sometimes maybe get a bit involved in the sessions. And there was like all this swinging and like throwing bean bags and these cool like little, I don't know, toys and just little bits and pieces that you just go, oh, this just looks like so much fun. And then when I left high school, I really wanted to be a physiotherapist, because I wanted to help people and I wanted to, kind of give people the opportunity to either like rehabilitate or develop skills, like rehabilitate in the sense like they've had a stroke or an injury and they're no longer able to walk or move the way that they used to. And the kind of scope within physiotherapy to work with children's a lot smaller than occupational therapy. And when I kind of looked at what were my options leaving school, OT kind of came up and I was like, actually, I remember my sister doing that and that actually seemed really cool and I really like kids. So actually maybe I'll give that a go.
That's really cool. I remember a lot of stuff with my brother. He had a lot of development delays, like he was dyslexic, but there was a lot of like reading and writing and stuff like that he struggled with. And I remember vaguely going to appointments for him with him and my mother after school and things like that. So I do kind of, I understand what you're saying. It's funny how our pasts and things like that really can influence our futures. Like it's a lot of people have been saying that too. The other professionals I've spoken to, it's always ties back into an experience that they've had as a child or a young adult. So I think that's really cool because it's almost like you had a calling and went with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like I got that right, and it is and it was a calling because I'm still doing it today.
Yeah, and very good at it, I might add. But
Thank you.
So, what would you say is your favorite? What would you say is your favorite part of your job?
I really like hearing people's stories and kind of meeting them where they're at, getting to know them, getting a sense of what sort of makes their day special and what are that person or that little person's strengths and interests. What is it about sort of daily life that's challenging for them? And like a particular like thing that I really love sounds really trivial, but is when like I think with the spaces that we've set out with Inside Out, is when you bring on board like a new little person, or even if you've been seeing them for a couple of sessions, then walking into the room and being like, oh, wow, like this is going to be fun. Like I thought mum and dad were bringing me here because I needed to work on my behavior or because I needed to learn things, and you were just going to teach me and tell me how to do them. And they walk in the room and they see swings, they see a rock wall, they see all this fun equipment, and they're like, oh, actually, maybe this isn't going to be so bad. And then when they come back to their next session, the next session after that, the parent's like, oh, they couldn't wait to come back. They couldn't wait to come back. And I think, yeah, the way that we work is very child-led and very play-based. So a child doesn't often even realise what they're learning or what we're kind of achieving in terms of the, I guess, science and just what the underlying reasons why they're there and how we're working on that. They just kind of come in and see it as fun and play.
It's a very natural thing too, and like it's kind of like when they say if you find something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So it's very much like it translates the same way with the therapy, I think. And I mean, I've obviously seen your clinic, and it's amazing. And you've done like an amazing job decking it out, and it's I can totally understand why there isn't a single kid out there that isn't excited to go. I know my son would constantly ask. And it's like trying to tell them, no, it's fortnightly. It's not like every day. It's you're doing it right when they just keep asking to go back constantly. So it's pretty awesome. Yeah. And obviously you have your therapy dogs too, which tell me a little bit about them because they're awesome.
So when I kind of decided to set up my own practice, I was really interested in obviously therapy dogs, and I think I came into that space as it was sort of booming, and a lot of practices were, I guess, trying that out. And I'm absolutely obsessed with Australian Shepherds. I feel like they're like a collectible, like there's 4 different kind of colours and then there's variations within that. So I was like, I've got to collect all these Australian Shepherds, different colours. And I just love the nature of that breed, all the ones I've come across anyway. And the idea that I could share that love with other people and offer an interaction partner that offers it's like a judgment-free interaction. A dog doesn't care if you come in and you haven't had a shower. A dog doesn't care if you're in a bit of a grumpy mood. Like, they are happy to see you genuinely all the time. And I think particularly for our kids who are highly anxious and you're putting more of a load on them, just even saying hello and, sort of being like, oh, can you, we'll get you to take your shoes off, or do you want to choose a game that you want to play? Like, that's even a load sometimes for these kids. So having this, dog where there is no pressure, they can interact with that dog however they want, obviously within sort of safety and like considerations around the dog's kind of well-being, but it's a lot less pressure than what it can be sometimes with a human. And the fact that it is all nonverbal means they're not processing body language. So I think that can be really powerful. So being able to share that with the clients, it's really powerful, and it's not the right fit for every child, but when it is, it's pretty magical to watch.
Yeah, I've seen a lot, like kids light up as soon as they enter the clinic and see Amigo in there or Lucy in there. And even the parents do. Like, I'm not going to lie, so do I. But, I don't know. It's something about animals. And as you say, it's non-judgmental. The love's, like, unconditional. And there's no expectation for conversation or anything like that, and you kind of know that the dog's going to say yes, like, and just embrace whatever you want to do rather than be like, oh, I don't want to do that, let's do this instead. So
exactly.
There's not that, like, confrontation is not the word, but like there's no disagreements as such. So they're just they're easygoing, and they just love you no matter what.
They do. Yeah.
Okay, least favorite part of your job?
Oh, report writing. I can talk till the hills come home about, different kind of information or strategies, or sharing information, resources, strategies, coming up with fun games and engaging children in play. But ask me to write that in a report, why I'm doing that and how I'm doing that. It can be really tricky to kind of articulate that, particularly in a world where NDIS maybe doesn't always value some of those, I guess, kind of more finessed sort of capacities or skills. And, you know, it all comes down to dollars and cents and what can this child not do and why do they need this funding, rather than like this person, you know, has a lot of strengths. It's not actually just about all the things that they can't do. They are more than that, and they are more than this piece of paper that's written about them. So, yeah, reports would be up there. The next bit would be, I guess, just coming across kind of different people from all sort of walks of life, and whether it's just a parent kind of reporting on an interaction with a school or a teacher or a person in the community, just people who don't get it and are judgmental and harsh. And, you know, being a parent is hard enough without then having the load of, I guess, worrying that you making accommodations for your child is you enabling them or spoiling them, or you're reinforcing negative behaviors. I think there's just still a really big lack of awareness around what actually calm is in terms of regulation and behavior. And I think just because a child can look like they're functioning okay at school, it doesn't mean that they are. And I think it's just still the lack of awareness and understanding about, I guess, what these kids need, what our parents are going through. There is just not enough support by a mile for neurodivergent kids and their families. Yep. So I think that's hard, is for every family and child that you are helping, there are 10 more that you aren't. And even then, what you do in the clinic versus what happens out there in the real world can still be like worlds apart.
So you hadn't answered this one on the profile, so I don't know if you just didn't see it. So surprise question, potentially.
Okay.
Why is your profession so important?
I think occupational therapists we pull so much information from so many different facets of somebody's life, and we're looking at things like their ability to take care of themselves. And that's whether it's a physical kind of need, like, you know, eating or brushing their teeth or getting dressed. It's about them taking care of themselves in terms of, you know, their kind of sensory needs, their emotional needs, and, you know, being able to look at things like sensory and self-regulation. I think we're really a profession that does that really well. You know, looking at what are some of the things that you kind of have to do. So some of those, like, more what we call productive occupations. So things like school, work, learning, thinking, you know, learning new skills, that kind of thing. And then looking at like leisure, like what do you want to do? What do you enjoy? What kind of makes you who you are? Like what's your identity? And that kind of, I guess sort of, more kind of reflection on the self and what brings meaning to your life. I think occupational therapists really look at strengths. We don't look at just sort of that kind of medical model of like, oh, you can't do this or you can't do that, or focusing solely on what someone can't do and trying to remediate weaknesses. We focus on, well, let's build your strengths. Let's build the things you are good at, and, you know, start where you're at rather than where we think you should be.
Yeah, it's almost like a holistic life skills learning experience. Like you're teaching life skills, but it's not necessarily life skills that people think about or have thought about, because a lot of it comes naturally to so many people. So it's like you're really digging deep, and you're doing basic life skills too, or basic life skills, quotations. But yeah, there's a lot of little bits and pieces that people just don't think about, because it is generally a natural thing that people just learn. But for us, it's like, no, we don't just learn that. It needs to be taught to us and broken down into more simplistic steps to get us to that end goal. So it's very, I feel like OT is a very important aspect in therapy, because it's teaching you how to live and survive as well, to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, yeah, with, working with neurodivergent individuals and their families, like you said, yeah, interaction can be painful for some people. It's hard work and they're traumatized from trying to do it like everybody else. And we've almost got to kind of find ways to make that pleasurable and engaging and supportive rather than, yeah, kids feeling that they need to come in a mask or camouflage and kind of, yeah, go along with maybe activities and things that that don't feel comfortable or right for them. So just being in situations where they can, kind of have some autonomy and, yeah, be able
That's
to
definitely a big
engage.
thing. Like
Yeah,
kids do
yeah,
do
I
the
agree.
masking a lot.
Yeah, they do. They do. They mask a lot and they comply a lot. And, I think occupational therapists, particularly where I'm situated, it's genuinely child led. It's genuinely play based. If a child comes in and they're really dysregulated and they need to spend 60 minutes in a cloud swing, we will do that because that's what that person needs, that little person needs on that day. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get confused with like a well-behaved child versus a child that's masking. Like, oh, your child's so well
Mm,
behaved and compliant. It's like that's not necessarily. It's not. There's that mixed kind of signals with that stuff. Like people seem to think if a child is lashing out, they're naughty, but it's not necessarily the case. It's just that they're not coping,
yeah.
and they're not masking anymore. They probably weren't coping before, but it just has gotten to a point where they can't mask anymore, and so it just all kind of explodes. And
Yeah.
I find that often the quietest ones that are the most compliant ones are generally the ones that are really bottling it up and are probably real firecrackers when it does come time that they
Yeah.
can't hold it in any longer. So
Yeah.
it's really hard. People need to stop kind of using that language, I think, in that shaming kids into compliance and being well behaved and stuff like that. It's very yeah, it's very toxic.
It is, yeah, I would agree with that. And like even what you're talking about in terms of the lashing out, I was chatting with a parent last week and they brought to my attention a concept called equalizing, which I had never heard of before. And it was like a real reframe around kids where they will lash out, particularly children with a PDA or pathological demand avoidance kind of profile. Equalizing is that child's nervous system trying to recover from a loss of autonomy. And so they will lash out at their parent potentially because it's like I need to get back some sense of feeling like I've got agency or kind of some control over this situation. And so they're doing it in a way to just, I guess, kind of
Mm.
level that feeling for them. And it's an attempt to regulate sometimes, but it's not knowing a way to do it that's going to bring back that feeling of being in control of their body in a way that's, I guess, maybe more pro-social and more, yeah, I guess, yeah, just having other ways to do that. I think that's challenging. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting concept that I hadn't thought of
Mm.
before around some of those, where kids might come home and be quite explosive. It's them trying to get back some control and it's just not knowing how to do that and how to kind of let the valve off that, I guess, yeah, all the pressure that's kind of built up all day. And then, yeah, it kind of comes out in ways that I'm sure that they don't want it to be like that. There just isn't maybe another way for them to kind of, yeah, let that out and to regulate that may be perceived by others as more typical.
It sounds like in your profession you're always learning too. Like
Oh,
it's
always.
and that I
Yeah,
think that's cool because it never get boring. Like you're constantly learning new things and new approaches and yeah, you get to meet new people which you're meeting like the best people on the planet, let's be honest.
totally. Yes, definitely. Definitely. And like, I learned so much from the lived experience of the neurodivergent community. Yeah, you just learn so much because yeah, like that's that parent's experience. And yes, like that concept, it's a theory, but that's that parent's way of making sense of that. And there's something in that that could help another parent so that they're not feeling like, oh, there's something I'm not doing right. And that's like I think being able to validate people's experience because we're not alone in this. These are things that are challenging for lots of people. And it's yeah being able to I guess share like share kind of ideas and strategies as a community rather than people feeling they have to.
Yeah, it takes a village, and it's constantly like leaning on each other for support, but also for advice. And I mean, as we've said a couple of times now, every child's different. So the approach may not work for someone, but they may not have thought about that approach and to give it a go, because you never
Yeah.
know. Like, I know that for me, it's just like, I'll try anything. Like, like you get to the point where it's almost like desperation, and you just you want something to work, so you'll be willing to try anything, even if it sounds weird. But yeah, it's that community support, and I find that the neurodivergent community is very supportive.
Yeah, definitely.
And everyone wants to help each other because they can relate so much to the struggle, and they know how hard it is, and they don't want to see other people struggling. So I kind of feel privileged and lucky in a way that I'm part of that community now, because it's kind of opened up a new world that you don't know exists until you really step into it. And of course, you kind of get that privilege to be led into those worlds, and the
Yes.
worlds of everyone that you work with. So it's yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice, a nice thing. But I've got a couple of questions from people that have been watching and listening.
Cool.
So we'll finish off our interview with those. So the first one is, how can parents assist their child to develop their self-regulation skills?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of go straight to this kind of concept around sort of self-regulation, which I think is, such a focus of what occupational therapists do. It's, a big kind of challenge for neurodivergent community and for, children in general. And, really the way that self-regulation develops is through co-regulation, and that's really about having another kind of nervous system that can support your nervous system to kind of come down or to come up, depending on whether they're needing up regulation or down regulation. And regulation is really around, it's not about calm, it's about matching the situation. So for example, regulation in a roller coaster situation is going to be a very heightened, excitable little person versus, say, the regulation or the kind of arousal state that you'd want to see for reading a book, for example. So, regulation is developed through co-regulation, and that's, it's usually done in that parent-child kind of relationship first, because it's happening very, very early. Even little babies and mums are doing that, that co-regulation. Baby's really upset that food, they're hungry, and mum's like, oh, I know you're really hungry. Oh, food's coming soon. Oh, yeah, get ready. Here it comes. And they're kind of attuning to that child's needs and validating that, and then using their kind of nervous system and that, I guess, that relational kind of like, I'm in this with you kind of way of being, and they're kind of soothing the child. So it's like the baby's up here really, really upset, and they're kind of going, oh, I can hear that so hard, but it's going to be okay. And they might be slowing down their voice or using more of a whisper, or like if it's like the older child and they're having difficulties with regulating, say, anger or frustration, they might bring their nervous system up a little bit. Oh, I can see that. So frustrating. Like, oh, that's so hard. And then kind of validating that experience, and then being able to kind of go, oh, like, yeah, that was tricky. Like, I can see that. And, really using their kind of calm nervous system and being able to kind of match them, but not get swept up in the emotion of that, where that little person is at. So I think, regulation is really developed through co-regulation, because that's how your nervous system learns how to downregulate and how to soothe. And so kind of expecting young children to do that independently is not, yeah. You could argue that most of regulation happens through some form of co-regulation at some point. And there's definitely a point where there may be some need to kind of for someone to take themselves out of an interaction to then regulate, to then kind of come back and then sort of go, yeah, look, I was actually really, frustrated by that. And then, being able to kind of continue. But I think, neurodivergent individuals, they may regulate in different ways too. And, stimming can be a big part of that. And, having also like special interests or, being able to kind of take themselves away from interaction can also be useful. So I think regulation has different functions, but I think when we're working with our kids, we want to work through co-regulation so that they get that opportunity to experience regulation through being with another in a state where they feel validated and they can kind of use that other person's nervous system to down-regulate. Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I like that you've explained that we literally start co-regulating with our children from birth, because I've never thought of it that way, but that is so true. And that's you've probably noticed that more since having your own kid.
Yes.
Now that you've got your little guy. So
kids have a lot of emotions.
Yeah, it brings it all into perspective a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotions.
They really do. They really do.
It's a lot. And
we've all been there though, technically.
Yeah. So, and, and whatever their experiences, it might be like, oh, you've taken that pair of scissors away that, they probably were going to injure themselves with, but it's still, they're still, having like that emotion around it. Yep. So even though I think, oh, I'm taking something, like I'm trying to keep you safe, for them, that's really dysregulating. So being able to kind of meet children in that and soothe their emotions rather than sort of like, oh, you need to regulate, so have a few deep breaths, and that's just not going to work with little people a lot of the time. So
okay, another question. Let's see, what impacts can ADHD have on an ASD child's stimming? So I guess this particular child has the comorbid of autism and ADHD. And they've got an example of, if they are hyper, is it more difficult for them to be able to focus enough to self-regulate?
I think this one's really tricky to answer, because I think, there'd be sort of a lot more questions I would want to ask, like things like, for example, so with this child's hyperactivity, what sorts of things, might sort of happen that cause that hyperactivity? What does that hyperactivity look like? What are the strategies to kind of support that little person to downregulate if they are really hyperactive in an environment or a task that doesn't kind of need that level of input? Also, is that hyperactivity supporting them to regulate? Because actually their brain is going that fast. And if there's this real discrepancy between my brain going this fast and my body needing to be still, that's not going to be regulating for them. So matching, like it might be that they're actually processing something and they need to move in order to do that. And then, so there's lots of things around the hyperactivity, and then I guess around their autism diagnosis, like how does that kind of impact their sensory processing? How does that impact under sensory processing their interoception and being able to read their own body cues? So things like hunger, thirst, fatigue, that kind of thing. And then I guess, what are their stims? What sort of stims soothe them? What sort of stims are regulating to them? And so it might be, working out what things might help. And it might be working out how you put them in their environment and give them access to those. And like, I think it could be that when they're more hyperactive, they may find it harder to access those stims, or they might access those stims, but it might be more sort of quick, short, sharp bursts of it, that they may be hyperactive and then they'll go to stim, but it's like a very quick sort of stimulatory behavior, which maybe isn't necessarily meeting that overall nervous system need. But then they may be on to the next thing, and then they may come back and stim again, but it may be in a short burst. And then again, is that working for that individual? It might be. So I think it's very individual. And there'd probably be a lot more kind of layers I'd want to explore around that, and working out the functions of the hyperactivity, the functions of the stimming, and working out what things are soothing to them. And with that hyperactivity is actually we need to down-regulate first, so that we're in a place where that stim can actually do its full, offer its full kind of benefit to that individual. hope that answers that. It's a hard question, that one.
It is, and as you say, everything OT and stuff like that's very personalized, isn't it? So
Super
it's hard
duper,
to
yeah.
answer a question so broadly when you're so used to a full personalized experience. So I don't know if you'll be able to answer the next one either. But the last question is, how can I stim and still be productive at the same time or in the same moment?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, again, like coming back to I guess someone's individual kind of sensory based needs, and our sensory system is really working on getting enough input to register that input has happened. So that might be, if someone needs a lot of movement to kind of feel regulated in their body, like it might be that they need more of that. So how do you support them to access that? But then movement on its own may not be enough, and they need, I guess, some of what we call proprioceptive or heavy work. So it's matching that together to help them to feel regulated. And the reason they may need more is because their sensory receptors are not able to give them enough information about where their body is in space unless they get that input. So, thinking about what are the sensory needs of this person for them to feel regulated and to feel grounded and sort of organized in their body. And, if we kind of think from a sensory perspective, there's lots of tools that people can use that don't necessarily require them to be accessing that nonstop. So, for example, if somebody really needs movement and heavy work, maybe it's a matter of they do some of that movement and heavy work before they sit down, so that then they're not sitting there feeling the need to kind of constantly, tap or, sort of move their leg, and that impacts their ability to be productive. Or it might be that while they're doing that, they look at getting something they could put under their feet, like a roller or something like that, that could give that input whilst they're still, typing away at a computer or, doing some kind of other task. So thinking about what are the sensory tools that they could access that would give that input, but still mean that they can focus on what they're doing. So again, it kind of comes down to individual sort of sensory preferences and sensory needs. And then like the stimming could also be related to kind of emotional regulation too. So, being aware of what things might create more dysregulation and that the stimming is helping to soothe. So being able to kind of, work those things out. So when those things do happen, they know what they can access quite quickly and immediately, so that then they can kind of get on with what they need to get on without it completely kind of becoming then just full stimulatory behavior, which is all consuming. So I hope that answers that. It's a tricky one. Yeah. I think it can be hard though you may be self-aware, but sort of maybe in that moment it's hard to kind of know how to access those things. So I guess having your environment set up for that is going to help you. And then also, where appropriate, someone else that can maybe help you access those things, particularly for our kids, someone that's going to kind of be like, oh, but, you could, here's something you could chew, or here's something you can, here's a body sock. Go and get that deep pressure from that body sock before we kind of get on with your. Yeah.
Bit of guidance.
Yeah. Support to access it.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for coming along and chatting with me today. You've been a wealth of knowledge, so hopefully your chat has answered some questions for some people.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an OT or a speechy or a counsellor or anything like that, hit up Inside Out Therapy, because they're amazing. And
Thanks, Jamie Lee. Thanks. It was great to be a part of this, and I hope that someone watching this gets, finds this helpful, and it's been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much.